So my kind of bottom line, so to speak, would be that drugs are neither good nor bad. There's lots of instances of how they're inappropriately marketed, and there's lots of real need for objective consumer drug information. When I say objective, stuff that's produced by independent groups, stuff that's not funded by the pharmaceutical industry, and collectively we're paying the cost of our prescription drug habit, our growing prescription drug habit. When we decide to take newer drugs when older ones will do, when we decide to take drugs when non-drug treatments are as effective, when we try to allow the pharmaceutical industry to define disease, we're paying the collective cost of all that. So what does good drug information look like? So I would say evidence-based, drawn from the best clinical studies, even though we've seen, if we were looking at the evidence around antidepressants 10 years ago, you would say that the evidence looks pretty good. It's because you're only looking at half of the evidence, not the stuff that was kept from us. Though, I think that's probably a rare example. There are very good evidence-based sources out there, and those sources discuss the benefits and the harms of the treatment, and quantifies things in a way that people can understand and involves people in making decisions. So just some summary on some of the things to remember about drugs used by old people. So antibiotics, again, there is such a push to use newer antibiotics, and penicillin, which was developed 50 years ago, older, effective for most things. It's always safer and smarter to start with older antibiotics. Same with asthma treatments. In terms of the ADHD, the issue is, as you could appreciate, very complicated and very, it's controversial. There's kind of a bit of a divide between the medical version of ADHD and the sort of parents' experience of parents, I guess, and teachers' experience with ADHD. And I think that when you talk to doctors, they'll say, oh, the parents are demanding it, or the teachers are demanding it. And I've heard this a lot from physicians. The teacher is demanding that the child be put on an ADHD type drug, or the parent is demanding it. When you talk to parents and teachers, in my experience, they will say, there's lots of other things we want to try. They're not the adequate, there may not be the sort of adequate supports in place. The drugs, maybe they do have some benefit, though we would use that as a last resort. And it's like this in a lot of sort of drug situations where essentially the patients refer to the physicians as pushers, and the doctors refer to the patients as demanders or highly expectant that they're going to walk out of the office with a prescription. There's no other bit of caution. Says, caution, this sign has sharp edges, do not touch the edges of the sign. Also, the bridge is out ahead, in small print. Those are what I would consider to be some of the, except for the last one, which is my own website, but the others actually have very good quality information. And when anybody asks me about drug information for women, I always say that the National Women's Health Network in the US, or the Canadian Women's Health Network, produce, I think, some of the best quality stuff. They don't take money from the drug companies. The Canadian Women's Health Network had a very, I would say, cautionary notes. They would adopt the position that I would adopt, which is, what's the disease you're talking about? How frequent is it? Well, cervical cancer, yes, bad. How often does it affect 13-year-old girls that you're giving the vaccine to? Well, not very often, but they're going to eventually have sex, they'll be exposed to the virus, they could go on and develop it. The one issue that I had is that the treatment never actually showed that it prevented cancer, right? It can show, like it's a vaccine. It prevents the spread of a virus. So the women, the girls, I should say, who were given the vaccine were less likely to have picked up the virus because they developed some immunity to it. The real question you want to know is, does that mean they're not going to get cervical cancer? And no one knows. It's a big question mark around that. It takes years, decades for cancers to grow. I mean, what's the average age of someone who gets cervical cancer? I'm not sure. I'm sure it's probably 40s or 50s. You don't get it when you're 13 when you're getting the vaccine. So this is something that develops over years. They have not been able to demonstrate that the vaccine actually prevents cancer. They hope it does. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of concern. There's a lot of concern around the potential side effects of the vaccine. Like any treatment, it has to be on the market for a while to actually see the problems. And that's one of the concerns that people in my field have, is that a lot of these treatments are tested before they get approved, but they're tested in short periods of time with small numbers of people. And so you don't really see the effects. If the adverse effects happen in 1 in 10,000, but they only tested the drug or the treatment on 5,000 people, you're not going to see it. But then when you get it out in the population and millions of people start using it, that's when the bodies show up. Common? Oh, happens all the time. Happens. I was looking at treatments for rheumatoid arthritis the other day. I'm writing a piece for Consumer Reports and I couldn't believe how many of these treatments had black box. They all had black box warnings. And these are relatively new treatments. And sometimes the black box warning will be just a little thing with a line saying, you know, this drug can cause, you know, severe anaphylactic reactions, and has been noted. But sometimes the black box warning has several paragraphs, and that's what I saw around. So yeah, they're very common. They always add it after it's been on the market. If they knew the danger of the treatment before it got to market, they probably wouldn't have let it go on the market. So the black box warnings are for the drugs that are already on the market, for which they have to advise the patient or the prescriber of the dangers. I'll tell you one thing. I was looking at data in some of the public sector unions here in BC. So there were nurses, teachers, healthcare workers, and others. So just in that data, I looked at the nature of the top 20 most prescribed or most sold drugs, the most expensive drugs, right? So it's not a nature of the volume, it's a volume times the price. So the most costly drugs to the drug plans, in the top 20, there were at least 10 of them that had black box warnings. See, this is why I see the advantage of the internet in many of these things, is that you can actually collect real-time data from people around their experience with drugs, like that SSRI stories. So people who have stories or have experiences can go to some forum on the internet and say, hey, this happened to me, what about you? And you'll get stuff there. And like I say, you don't change your life because of it, but at least it's like having access to a bunch of neighbors. You know, the neighbors could live in, you know, Africa or Europe or whatever, but if they're having similar experiences that you're having with the same drug, you know, it's a good chance for you to get a bit of a reality check. I mean, we always use, and we have even before the internet, we use our neighbors to sort of check whether what we're doing is what they would do. And now with the internet, we can check this, yeah, around the world. A drug like aspirin, good old plain old aspirin, I think would have a black box warning in terms of not using that drug in children because of Ray's syndrome and other things, right? You know, if your kid has a headache, you should use like baby Tylenol or acetaminophen. I'm not sure if it has a black box warning or not, but I certainly that warning around aspirin not used in children is out there. Yeah. It's an over-the-counter treatment, so it's a little bit different.